The entire family group chat was silent when my son texted me, "We're cutting ties. Don't come to family dinner anymore." I made a single phone call the next morning that would ruin all he had worked so hard to create. Please let me know where you're viewing from and subscribe if you're watching this. Alexander was unaware that I had spent the last 3 years gathering proof of his misdeeds. On a Tuesday at 9:47 a.m., the message arrived. My phone rang with the family group chat notice when I was in my Upper East Side apartment, drinking green juice and wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace. Thumbtaps were used to discard 30 years of tradition. "We've decided to break things up, Mom. No longer intend to attend family gatherings. Everyone will benefit most from this." As everyone read those words, I kept my eyes fixed on them and watched the tiny check marks form. My lovely daughter-in-law, Victoria, replied with an emoji of laughter and tears. Robert, my brother, left it on red. Janet, my sister-in-law. The sounds of crickets. Nobody stood up for me. I captured a screen grab. Proof, sweetheart. Always gather proof. The complete picture was shown by scrolling up through months' worth of communications. Birthday celebrations, to which I was not invited. Plans for weekend excursions without me. In a parallel universe without Margaret Wilson, holidays and graduations took place. How very contemporary of them. Victoria most recently posted a picture from their trip to the Hamptons. Those expensive swimwear and champagne toasts were paid for with my money. Every moment topped with caviar was made possible by Alexander's paycheck from the business I founded. You could serve the irony at dinner parties because it was so thick. I put my phone down and made my way to the window in my kitchen. New York, 67 stories below, was a hive of activity as individuals forged alliances, destroyed adversaries, and struck agreements that would alter the course of history. How appropriate that I would be going to join them today. Like an old buddy, my landline lay on the marble counter. I took it up and called a number that I had never used but had committed to memory 3 years prior. I had saved that number for just this time. 2 rings. When she replied, I said, "Margaret Wilson, I believe that talk is long overdue." After a moment, the voice chuckled, a deep, sardonic laugh that sent shivers down my spine. "I wanted to know when you would call." "No more wondering then. How soon are you able to meet?" "For you? In an hour, I can be there." After hanging up, I noticed my image in the Chrome coffee machine. The lady who had read that text 90 minutes prior was not the same one who was looking back. This woman had a raised chin, squared shoulders, and a menacing sparkle in her eyes. Did Alexander wish to sever relations? Excellent. He wouldn't notice the cut until he was bleeding, so I would give him scissors that were so sharp. Once more, my phone buzzed. Alexander, who is presumably worried about my radio silence, is phoning from his office line. As soon as I hung up, I saw his name show once more, but then again, and once more. How tasty. A day ago, I weighed dead weight. Suddenly, I was worth frantic phone calls. I returned to the family discussion by typing. The message was clearly understood. Savor your final meal as a family. I then departed from the gathering. You burn some bridges. You may use dynamite to blow up others, and then watch the fragments tumble into the river below. I was feeling really explosive today. Within minutes, the family collapse struck like a tsunami. Before turning to more frenzied messages, Alexander made 17 calls. As I sipped champagne, I observed his despair and made detailed plans for destroying what he had taken from me. What was meant by "last dinner, Mom"? Now answer your phone. This is no longer amusing. Vic is experiencing a panic attack. Are you content? Vic is experiencing a panic attack. Oh, it was priceless. I had finally retaliated, and the woman who had spent the previous 2 years methodically removing me from family pictures was now breathing heavily. I took screenshots of all the messages in my expanding evidence base. My doorman came buzzing. "Your visitor has come, Mrs. Wilson. Marcus, send her up." And for the next 2 hours, Marcus, there should be no disruptions. I'm not available to anyone, no matter what. Eleanor Hartwell emerged from my elevator with the appearance of someone who had just emerged victorious from a hostile takeover. A grin sharp enough to do surgery, Louboutin heels that could pierce a man's ego, and an Armani outfit that cost more than most people's automobiles. "Margaret," she said, air-kissing both cheeks, "you look absolutely radiant. Revenge suits you. I haven't even started yet." I led her to my living room where contracts were spread across the coffee table like battle plans. Champagne? We're celebrating. What exactly are we celebrating? Alexander's education. He's about to learn what happens when you dismiss the woman who built your playground. Eleanor's predatory eyes gleamed as she studied the paperwork. "These are your Wilson Enterprises shares. 49.8%. I never liked being controlling." I laughed, though I suppose I'm about to become very controlling indeed. She settled into my Italian leather sofa, crossing her legs with the confidence of someone who destroyed bigger empires before breakfast. "Tell me everything." I pulled out a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Bank statements, email printouts, recorded conversations, photographs of Alexander and Victoria living beyond their legitimate means. The kind of evidence that could bury someone so deep, archaeologists would classify them as a historical find. Alexander thinks he's been clever, moving company funds through offshore accounts, creating fake vendor contracts, paying himself bonuses that would make a Fortune 500 CEO blush. I flipped through pages of financial records. And Victoria? Sweet Victoria's been treating our charitable foundation like her personal shopping budget. Eleanor whistled low. "This is embezzlement, multiple felonies, among other delightful crimes: fraud, tax evasion, breach of fiduciary duty. It's like they were using a criminal activity checklist." My phone erupted with another call from Alexander. I declined it without looking and watched Eleanor's shark-like grin widen. "You're not answering." I learned that technique from them. Funny how family communication becomes one-way traffic when it's convenient. I added Eleanor's number to my contacts under Partner in Justice. "So what's your endgame?" "Simple. You buy my shares with very specific performance clauses. Clauses that give you authority to audit every department, restructure management, and remove anyone guilty of financial irregularities." "And your son?" "Alexander's about to discover that actions have consequences. Victoria's going to learn that stealing from the wrong woman can end careers permanently." I softened slightly. "And my grandson Luke will finally see what real strength looks like." Eleanor signed the contracts with a gold pen that probably cost more than Alexander's car payment. "This is going to be spectacular." "Oh, darling," I said, clinking champagne glasses. Spectacular doesn't begin to cover it. The revelation that justified everything came through Victoria's own Instagram stupidity. While Alexander bombarded me with panicked voicemails, his wife was posting stories from their emergency family meeting, complete with champagne and oysters. Emergency indeed. I lounged in silk pajamas, watching their pathetic damage control unfold across social media. Victoria had geotagged their location at Le Bernardin because nothing says financial crisis like $200 tasting menus. The woman had the survival instincts of a lemming. But the story that shattered my last maternal hesitation came through my grandson Luke. Sweet 19-year-old Luke, the only family member with functioning brain cells and a moral compass. He called me at midnight, voice shaking. "Grandma, they're saying you've lost your mind. Dad says you threatened to destroy the family business out of spite." "And what do you think, sweetheart?" "I think they're lying. You don't do anything out of spite. You do things because they're right." He paused. But Grandma, they're telling everyone you never loved Dad, that you only cared about money and power. I sat in darkness, watching city lights twinkle below, and felt something inside me crystallize into pure determination. 35 years of raising Alexander, building something meaningful to leave behind. And this was how they rewrote history. Luke, do you remember when you broke your arm at age 8? Yeah, outside your Hamptons house. Who drove you to the hospital? You did. Dad was golfing. Mom was at the spa. Who stayed with you for 3 days, sleeping in that torture device they called a chair? You. His voice softened. You brought me comic books and smuggled in McDonald's when the nurses weren't looking. Your father visited once, for 20 minutes, to take a photo for social media. I let that truth settle. Does that sound like a woman who doesn't love her family? Silence stretched between us. Luke, I need you to understand something crucial. Wilson Enterprises employs 3,000 people. I created those jobs, funded college scholarships, donated millions to hospitals and schools. Your father and Victoria have been stealing from that legacy, from those employees, from your future. Stealing how? I explained in terms a Columbia business student would grasp immediately. The diverted charitable funds, offshore tax schemes, fake vendor contracts, funneling money into personal accounts. Luke understood the implications within minutes. Jesus Christ, Grandma. Language. But yes, Jesus Christ indeed. So when you sold your shares to Eleanor, I sold them to someone who can perform surgery without anesthesia. Someone who won't let family sentiment interfere with justice. Are you going to destroy them? I considered the question carefully, swirling imaginary wine in my empty glass. I'm going to give them exactly what they've earned through their choices, Luke. Nothing more, nothing less. Your father wanted to cut ties? Well, I'm exceptionally skilled with sharp instruments. Luke laughed, despite himself. You're terrifying. Thank you, darling. It's taken 67 years to perfect the technique. After hanging up, I made chamomile tea and reviewed Eleanor's preliminary audit findings. She'd moved with surgical precision, discovering financial irregularities that made my evidence look like amateur hour. Alexander and Victoria weren't just thieves. They were incompetent thieves, leaving digital fingerprints everywhere. Tomorrow, the real education would begin. Eleanor's first audit meeting escalated my son's panic into full-blown hysteria. She demanded financial records going back 5 years, access to all offshore accounts, and explanations for every transaction over $50,000. Alexander called me 63 times. I counted them while getting a manicure. Mrs. Wilson, my nail technician asked, should I answer that? It keeps buzzing. Oh no, darling. Let it buzz. It's like a very expensive vibrator. Eventually, the battery dies. She giggled while painting my nails crimson red. Victory red. By noon, Eleanor texted updates that made my day brighter than Times Square. Alexander had tried claiming the offshore accounts were strategic tax planning. Victoria insisted the charitable foundation purchases were necessary administrative expenses. Apparently, a $50,000 handbag was essential for foundation operations. I called Luke during his lunch break at Columbia. Grandma, campus is buzzing about Wilson Enterprises being under investigation. Someone posted about it on the business school forum. How fascinating. What are they saying? That Eleanor Hartwell bought controlling interest and is auditing everything. Professor Martinez used it as a case study in hostile takeovers. He paused. Dad tried calling me this morning. I didn't answer. Good boy. What would you have said if you had? Probably something about reaping what you sow. I nearly choked on my green juice. I've raised you well. Actually, Grandma, I have a confession. I've been documenting their spending for months for a class project on family business ethics. His voice turned sly. Want to see Dad's credit card statements from the last year? Luke Wilson, you beautiful, devious child. Email them immediately. 20 minutes later, I was staring at financial records that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Luxury vacations charged to company accounts. Personal shopping sprees billed as client entertainment. A $30,000 wine collection listed as office supplies. I forwarded everything to Eleanor with the subject line, "Dessert menu." Her response came instantly. "You've raised a delightfully ruthless grandson." At precisely 3 p.m., my landline rang, Alexander calling from his office. "Mom, we need to talk." "Do we? Because yesterday you seemed quite clear about cutting ties." I was angry. Victoria was upset about the foundation audit, upset about being caught stealing. You mean, she wasn't stealing. Those purchases were legitimate business expenses. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "Alexander, sweetheart, in what universe is a Hermes bag a legitimate foundation expense? Are we delivering aid to fashion-deprived regions?" Silence. "Mom, Eleanor's threatening to fire half the management team. How terrible. Maybe they should have managed better. She's demanding access to personal bank accounts. How invasive. Almost like she suspects criminal activity." "This isn't a joke. You're absolutely right. Embezzlement is very serious business." I examined my fresh manicure. I hear orange jumpsuits are quite slimming, though. "Mom, please. We can fix this. We can pay back whatever you stole." How generous. The desperation in his voice was delicious. 24 hours ago, I was dead weight. Now I was his only hope for salvation. The irony was so perfect it should be framed. "What do you want?" "Nothing you're capable of giving." "Alexander, money? I'll give you money." "With what?" "Your Cayman Islands account is frozen." The sound he made was somewhere between a whimper and a death rattle. "How do you know about—" "I know everything, darling. I've known for 3 years. I was simply waiting for the right moment to use it." I hung up and immediately called Eleanor. "How's the audit progressing?" "Like Christmas morning for forensic accountants. We found 7 offshore accounts, forged vendor contracts, and enough evidence to keep federal prosecutors busy for years. And Alexander? Crumbling beautifully. Victoria's already hired a criminal defense attorney. Perfect. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. The first direct confrontation happened in the Wilson Enterprises boardroom, where Alexander tried to stage a coup against Eleanor's authority. He walked into a carefully orchestrated ambush that left him speechless and me deeply satisfied. I arrived wearing my best Chanel suit, the navy one that made me look like I could buy and sell countries before lunch. Eleanor had invited me as consulting advisor, which was corporate speak for ringside seat to watch your son implode. Alexander stood at the head of the mahogany table, surrounded by nervous board members who'd suddenly developed intense interest in their coffee cups. Victoria sat beside him, clutching a designer handbag like a life preserver. Poor thing looked like she'd aged 5 years in 3 days. "This audit is harassment," Alexander began, his voice shaking slightly. "Eleanor's overstepping her authority as minority shareholder." "Majority shareholder," Eleanor corrected smoothly. "I now own 51% of Wilson Enterprises, thanks to additional shares purchased from your mother's personal holdings." Alexander's face went the color of expired milk. "That's impossible. Mom only had 49.8% originally." "Yes, but I also purchased shares from your Uncle Robert and Aunt Janet yesterday evening." Eleanor smiled like a predator who'd cornered particularly slow prey. They were eager to sell after learning about the federal investigation. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Board members shifted uncomfortably, suddenly understanding they were witnessing an execution, not a meeting. "Federal investigation." Alexander's voice cracked. "Oh yes, The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit finds embezzlement fascinating, especially when it involves charitable foundations. Eleanor opened a folder thick enough to stop bullets. Would you like to explain these transactions to everyone? She slid photographs across the table. Credit card statements, bank transfers, receipts for purchases that would make lottery winners blush. Alexander's hands trembled as he recognized his own financial crimes spread out for public viewing. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. "Those were legitimate business expenses." "A $60,000 watch is business expense?" Board member Harrison asked sharply. "Client gifts require quality, charged to the Children's Cancer Foundation account," Eleanor added helpfully. The silence that followed was so thick, you could cut it with a butter knife and serve it at parties. Victoria made a small whimpering sound, like a wounded animal realizing the trap had already sprung. I stood slowly, letting my years of boardroom experience command attention. Every eye turned to me, too, and I savored the moment like expensive wine. "Alexander," I said, my voice carrying across the room like steel wrapped in silk. "Do you remember what I taught you about consequences when you were 7 years old? Mom, please, you stole cookies from Mrs. Henderson's kitchen and blamed the housekeeper. A woman supporting 3 children lost her job because of your lie." I walked closer, my heels clicking against marble like a countdown timer. "What did I make you do?" Alexander's face crumpled. "Confess and work to pay back her lost wages." "Exactly. Actions have consequences. Always." I turned to address the room. My son has forgotten this fundamental lesson. Victoria has helped him forget it. Today, they remember. Eleanor consulted her legal pad with theatrical precision. "Alexander Wilson, by majority shareholder vote, you're hereby terminated from all positions within Wilson Enterprises. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." "You can't do this." "Actually, I can, and I am." Eleanor's smile could have frozen hell. "Victoria Wilson, you're banned from all company properties pending criminal charges." Victoria finally found her voice. "Margaret, you're destroying your own family." I looked at this woman who'd systematically erased me from family photos, stolen from charities I'd built, and convinced my son to treat me like garbage. The woman now calling me family because she needed salvation. "Darling," I said, adjusting my grandmother's pearls, "I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply taking out the trash." Security appeared as if summoned by magic. Alexander and Victoria were escorted out like common criminals, which technically they were. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence. "Now then," Eleanor said cheerfully, "let's discuss replacing leadership with people who understand the difference between company funds and personal shopping budgets." Through the window, I watched Alexander and Victoria standing on the sidewalk, looking lost and small and utterly defeated. Justice, I decided, was absolutely delicious. The allies emerged from unexpected places, validating every decision I'd made and proving that Alexander and Victoria's reign of terror had created more victims than just me. By week's end, I had an army. Luke called Tuesday morning, voice bright with vindication. "Grandma, you won't believe what's happening at school. Professor Martinez wants to use your case as the semester's capstone project. How proper corporate governance protects stakeholder interests. How academic of him. Also, 3 of Dad's former employees contacted me through LinkedIn. They want to thank you personally. For what? For finally stopping what they call the hemorrhaging. Apparently, Alexander's been laying people off while giving himself raises. Mom's foundation purchases were funding luxury trips while cutting children's programs. I sat in my silk robe, sipping coffee that cost more than most people's hourly wage, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: validation. Not just from financial victory, but from moral clarity. "Luke, invite those employees to lunch, somewhere nice." "My treat. Are you building an alliance?" I'm building something better. Sweetheart, I'm building proof that we were right. Eleanor called an hour later, practically purring with satisfaction. Margaret, you need to see today's audit results. Alexander wasn't just stealing from the company, he was stealing from employee pension funds. How much? 2.7 million over 3 years. Redirected to offshore accounts that funded his and Victoria's lifestyle. Her voice turned predatory. The employees' retirement security paid for their Hamptons house renovations. I felt my blood pressure spike into dangerous territory. Stealing from me was personal. Stealing from loyal employees who'd built this company with their sweat and dedication? That was unforgivable. Eleanor, I want every penny recovered and returned to those pension funds. I don't care what it costs. Already in motion. Also, the FBI agents want to interview you tomorrow. Apparently, your evidence collection was so thorough, they're calling it a prosecutor's dream. How flattering. One more thing. The Wall Street Journal wants an exclusive interview. Business matriarch takes down corrupt dynasty is their working headline. I considered this carefully. Public vindication versus private satisfaction. The chance to tell my story versus the pleasure of watching Alexander squirm in silence. Schedule it. That afternoon, I met with Alexander's former employees at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant where Victoria had celebrated my supposed downfall a week earlier. 3 women, all middle management, all looking haggard from months of stress I'd unknowingly helped create. Mrs. Wilson, said Janet Morrison, former head of human resources, we thought you knew about the layoffs, the pension fund transfers, the budget cuts while executive compensation increased. I was deliberately kept uninformed, I admitted. My own son made sure I couldn't see what was happening. We wanted to contact you directly, but Alexander said you'd moved to assisted living, that you had dementia. The coffee cup in my hand trembled slightly. He told people I had dementia. Complete cognitive decline, added Sandra Chen, former finance director, said you couldn't handle business decisions anymore. That's why he needed full control of company operations. The restaurant's elegant atmosphere suddenly felt suffocating. My own son had declared me mentally incompetent to justify his theft, not just from me, but from every person who trusted Wilson Enterprises with their future security. Ladies, I said, setting down my cup with surgical precision, would you like to help me ensure justice is properly served? Their eager nods confirmed what I'd suspected. Alexander and Victoria hadn't just made enemies of me. They'd created an entire network of people hoping for their downfall. Perfect. Eleanor's hiring new management. You'll receive calls tomorrow about returning to your positions with appropriate authority to prevent this from happening again. Mrs. Wilson, Sandra said softly, why are you helping us? We failed to protect the company. You didn't fail. You were systematically undermined by people you trusted. I smiled, feeling my grandmother's steel spine straighten to its full height. And because, darling, no one steals from my people and lives to enjoy it. Walking out of that restaurant, I realized I wasn't just seeking revenge anymore. I was leading a revolution. And every revolution needs willing soldiers. Alexander had no idea what army was coming for him. The revenge reached its perfect crescendo when Eleanor called an emergency shareholder meeting and exposed everything publicly. Alexander's complete financial destruction played out in front of everyone who'd ever doubted my capabilities, and I watched with satisfaction that bordered on spiritual. The Pierce Conference Center buzzed with anticipation as shareholders, board members, journalists, and federal agents filled every seat. I chose a spot in the front row, wearing my late mother's diamond earrings and a smile that could cut glass. Alexander sat across the aisle, looking like he'd aged 20 years in 10 days. Eleanor commanded the podium like a conductor leading an orchestra of financial ruin. Ladies and gentlemen, today's presentation concerns the systematic embezzlement of Wilson Enterprises funds by former CEO Alexander Wilson and his wife, Victoria Wilson. The wall-mounted screens lit up with evidence that made my months of careful collection look amateur. Bank transfers, forged documents, email chains discussing creative accounting methods. Alexander's digital footprint of greed displayed in high definition for everyone to witness. Over 4 years, the defendants redirected $8.3 million from company operations, employee pension funds, and charitable foundations into personal offshore accounts. A murmur rippled through the audience. Alexander slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. Victoria wasn't even present. Her lawyer had advised against public appearances after yesterday's federal indictment. The lifestyle funded by these stolen funds included luxury vacations, designer purchases, real estate investments, and personal expenses totaling 3 times Mr. Wilson's legitimate salary. Eleanor clicked to the next slide. Photographs of Alexander and Victoria's social media posts. Champagne toasts in Santorini, funded by Children's Cancer Research. Designer gowns purchased with employee pension money. A yacht rental paid for with charitable donations intended for homeless shelters. The journalist from the Wall Street Journal scribbled notes furiously. This story would be front-page material by tomorrow morning. Most egregiously, when employee layoffs became necessary due to artificially reduced operating funds, Mr. Wilson approved his own salary increase of 40%. The room erupted. Shareholders shouted questions. Employees demanded answers. And somewhere in the chaos, I heard Alexander make a sound like a dying animal. I stood slowly, letting my presence command attention. The room fell silent. "If I may," I said, my voice carrying across the space with 40 years of boardroom authority, "I'd like to address my son directly." Eleanor yielded the podium with a gracious nod. I walked to the microphone, feeling every eye in the room follow my movement. This was my moment, the culmination of everything I'd built, lost, and reclaimed. "Alexander," I said, looking directly at the broken man who'd once been my pride and joy, "stand up." He rose shakily, looking like he might collapse. "You told people I had dementia, that I was incompetent to make business decisions, that I'd never loved you." My voice remained steady, each word precisely calculated. "You erased me from this company's history, excluded me from family gatherings, and instructed others to treat me like a burden." The silence was so complete, you could hear hearts breaking. "But mostly, Alexander, you forgot who taught you everything you knew about business, about ethics, about the difference between right and wrong." I paused, letting that truth settle. "Today, you remember." I turned to address the room. "Wilson Enterprises will continue operating under new leadership. Every stolen dollar will be returned to its rightful purpose. Every employee wrongfully terminated will be rehired with full benefits and back pay." Applause erupted from the employee section. Several people wiped away tears. As for my son, I looked back at Alexander, who was openly crying now. "Criminal charges have been filed. Federal authorities will handle justice from here. I'm simply ensuring that the empire I built continues serving the people it was meant to serve." Eleanor resumed control of the podium. "The FBI has requested that Mr. Wilson remain available for additional questioning. His passport has been surrendered pending trial." I returned to my seat, feeling lighter than I had in years. Around me, shareholders celebrated the promise of recovered investments. Employees cheered the restoration of their stolen security. And journalists captured every moment of corporate justice being served. Alexander remained standing, swaying slightly, looking around the room at faces that had once respected him, and now saw only a common thief. Justice, I reflected, was even more delicious when served publicly. Through the windows, I could see news vans arriving. This story would be national by evening, international by week's end. My son's disgrace would follow him everywhere, while my vindication would rebuild the legacy he'd tried to destroy. Perfect. Alexander's desperate attempt at retaliation came through Victoria's family lawyer, threatening to sue me for elder manipulation and coercive influence. Their pathetic legal counterattack only strengthened my position and provided more evidence of their complete moral bankruptcy. I was enjoying morning tea on my terrace when Eleanor called, laughing so hard she could barely speak. "Margaret, you need to see this lawsuit Victoria's family filed. It's comic genius. What are they claiming now? That you manipulated your elderly, diminished mental state to trick innocent young people into signing illegal contracts." Eleanor's laughter intensified. "They're claiming you have dementia and therefore couldn't legally sell your shares." I nearly choked on my Earl Grey. The same dementia Alexander claimed I had to justify stealing from employee pensions? The very same. Their entire defense strategy is that you're simultaneously too mentally incompetent to make business decisions and too mentally competent to be held responsible for their criminal prosecution. How delightfully contradictory. It gets better. They want to invalidate our share transfer agreement because you were allegedly under undue stress when you signed it. Apparently, being excluded from family dinner constitutes psychological duress. I set down my teacup and watched Central Park's morning joggers below. Such energy, such determination, rather like my current mood. "Eleanor, schedule a press conference. Today. What's your angle? If they want to claim I'm a frail, confused old woman, let's give them a demonstration of exactly how frail and confused I am." 2 hours later, I stood before assembled media, wearing my sharpest Armani suit and a smile that could intimidate Supreme Court justices. Cameras flashed as I approached the podium, my posture straight as a steel beam, my voice carrying 40 years of corporate authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to address recent claims about my mental fitness made by individuals currently under federal investigation for embezzlement." I pulled out a manila folder thick enough to stop bullets. "These are the financial records I personally compiled over 3 years, documenting systematic theft from Wilson Enterprises. Bank statements, transaction records, correspondence, recorded conversations, all collected through my allegedly diminished mental capacity." Laughter rippled through the press corps. I want to be clear about something. My son, Alexander, and his wife, Victoria, spent 4 years stealing from employee pension funds, charitable foundations, and company operations. When confronted with evidence of their crimes, they didn't express remorse or offer restitution. Instead, they hired lawyers to attack my mental competence. A reporter raised her hand. "Mrs. Wilson, how do you respond to claims that you were manipulated by business rivals?" I respond by pointing out that I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton Business School in 1976, built a $300 million company from a single fabric store, and successfully identified and documented complex financial crimes that federal agents called prosecution-ready evidence. I paused for effect. If that's diminished mental capacity, I'd hate to see what they consider sharp thinking. More laughter. Furthermore, I'd like to address claims of psychological duress. Yes, being excluded from family gatherings was painful. Do you know what's more painful? Learning that your son told employees you had dementia to justify stealing their retirement security. Learning that charitable donations meant for cancer research-funded luxury vacations. Learning that your own family viewed you as an obstacle to their criminal enterprise. The room fell silent. So yes, I was under stress. The stress of discovering that people I loved and trusted were thieves. The stress of realizing I'd raised a son who would steal from children's cancer foundations to buy designer handbags. The stress of watching my life's work being destroyed by people who mistook my patience for weakness. I closed the folder with a decisive snap. Alexander and Victoria Wilson are criminals who've been caught, prosecuted, and held accountable. Their attempt to claim I'm mentally incompetent only proves they still don't understand the most basic principle I taught them as children. Actions have consequences. A reporter called out, "What's next for Wilson Enterprises?" Excellence, integrity, a return to the values that built this company before it was corrupted by people who confused theft with strategy. I gathered my papers. Thank you for your time. Walking away from that podium, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this ordeal began. Not just vindication, but genuine peace. The public record was clear, the legal record was unshakable, and my reputation was not only restored, but enhanced. Eleanor waited by the exit, grinning like a shark who just discovered a fish buffet. That was beautiful. That was necessary. Now Alexander knows that even from his position of complete disgrace, he still can't touch me. My phone buzzed with a text from Luke. "Grandma, you're trending on Twitter. Your business matriarch is #1 worldwide." I smiled, thinking about how perfectly things had aligned. Sometimes justice doesn't just happen. Sometimes it arrives with spotlights and standing ovations. Alexander had tried one last desperate attack. Instead, he'd handed me complete and total victory. Perfect. My complete transformation reached its pinnacle when I walked into my first board meeting as Wilson Enterprises' new chairman. Commanding respect I'd earned through battle and demonstrating power I'd claimed through justice. The woman who entered that room was nothing like the one Alexander had dismissed 6 weeks earlier. I arrived wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one I'd worn the morning Alexander texted his dismissal, and a bespoke Chanel suit that cost more than Victoria's stolen handbag. My silver hair was styled in a power bob that announced authority before I spoke a word. The woman reflected in the conference room's glass walls was someone I barely recognized. Shoulders squared, spine straight, eyes sharp as precision instruments. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, taking my seat at the head of the mahogany table, where Alexander had once tried to banish me from relevance. "Welcome to the new Wilson Enterprises." The board members, some old allies, some new additions carefully vetted by Eleanor, listened with rapt attention as I outlined our reconstruction strategy. Every person Alexander had wrongfully terminated would be rehired. Every stolen dollar would be returned to its intended purpose. Every corrupt practice would be systematically eliminated. Our first quarter under ethical leadership shows remarkable results, Eleanor reported, consulting financial documents that painted a picture of rapid recovery. Employee morale is at 5-year highs. Charitable foundation efficiency has increased 60%, and we've attracted 3 major clients who'd refused to work with us under previous management. Board member Harrison raised his hand. "Mrs. Wilson, what about the criminal trials?" Alexander and Victoria face federal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion. Their trials begin next month. I smiled with satisfaction that bordered on predatory. I'll be testifying as the government's star witness, and the company's reputation, stronger than ever. Yesterday, Harvard Business School requested permission to use our corporate governance transformation as a case study. The Wall Street Journal called us a masterclass in stakeholder capitalism. Forbes wants me on their cover. Murmurs of approval circled the table. These people had watched me systematically dismantle corruption, rebuild institutional integrity, and emerge as a business leader worthy of international recognition. The contrast with Alexander's disgraceful leadership couldn't have been more pronounced. "What's our 5-year projection?" asked new board member Sarah Chen, whom I'd recruited from Goldman Sachs specifically for her expertise in ethical financial management. Conservative estimates suggest 20% annual growth driven by our reputation for integrity and our commitment to stakeholder value over pure profit extraction. I clicked to the next presentation slide. We're also launching the Wilson Foundation's new scholarship program, fully funded by recovered, stolen assets. The irony was delicious. Money Alexander and Victoria had stolen from charitable purposes would now fund education for deserving students who exemplified the integrity they'd completely lacked. "Mrs. Wilson," asked longtime board member Roberts, How do you feel about your transformation? I considered the question carefully, looking around the room at faces that showed genuine respect rather than the barely concealed dismissal I'd endured under Alexander's regime. 6 weeks ago, I was told I was dead weight, excluded from family gatherings, dismissed as irrelevant. My voice carried across the room with steel-wrapped authority. Today, I'm chairman of a $300 million company, a federal witness in a major criminal case and apparently trending on social media as an inspiration to businesswomen worldwide. Laughter rippled through the room. The transformation isn't just personal, it's institutional. Alexander led through fear, theft, and deception. I lead through transparency, accountability, and earned respect. I stood feeling every inch of my height, every year of my experience, every ounce of power I'd reclaimed through strategic warfare. The difference is that when people follow you out of fear, they abandon you the moment they find courage. When they follow you out of respect, they become allies in building something lasting. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Speaking of allies, we've received partnership inquiries from 12 companies that specifically cited your leadership as their motivation for wanting to work with Wilson Enterprises. And employees. Productivity is up 30%. Voluntary turnover is down 60%. Yesterday, 3 former employees who'd left under Alexander's management called asking to return. I thought about the woman who'd read that devastating text message 7 weeks ago. She'd been hurt, confused, questioning her own worth. The woman standing at this table had answers to all those questions and the power to ensure they were never questioned again. Ladies and gentlemen, this company will never again be held hostage by people who mistake cruelty for strength or theft for success. I gathered my papers with movements that commanded attention. We build value through integrity, lead through example, and prove that doing right is also doing well. The standing ovation that followed was something Alexander had never received, not once in all his years of leadership. Perfect. The public vindication reached its perfect crescendo when Wilson Enterprises won the Corporate Integrity Award at the National Business Ethics Conference, with me accepting the honor before an audience that included former skeptics who now stood and applauded my complete transformation. I walked onto the Lincoln Center stage, wearing the pearl necklace that had become my symbol of resilience and a navy Armani gown that announced victory without saying a word. 3 months earlier, I'd been dismissed as dead weight. Tonight, I was being celebrated as a model of corporate courage. Ladies and gentlemen, the presenter announced, this year's Corporate Integrity Award goes to Wilson Enterprises under the transformational leadership of Chairman Margaret Wilson for demonstrating that ethical business practices drive both moral and financial success. The audience erupted in applause as I approached the podium. In the front row, I spotted Luke beaming with pride, Eleanor recording on her phone, and several journalists who'd covered my story from corporate disgrace to national recognition. Thank you, I said, my voice carrying across the auditorium with confidence earned through battle. 7 months ago, I discovered that my own family had been systematically stealing from our company, our employees, and our charitable foundations. Today, every stolen dollar has been recovered and returned to its intended purpose. The applause intensified, but this award isn't just about exposing corruption. It's about proving that businesses built on integrity don't just survive, they thrive. Since implementing transparent governance practices, Wilson Enterprises has attracted new clients, retained valuable employees, and increased both profitability and social impact. I held up the Crystal Award, watching light fracture through its surfaces like hope breaking through darkness. I want to share this recognition with every employee who continued working ethically despite corrupt leadership, every board member who supported transparency over convenience, and every stakeholder who believed that businesses can be forces for good in the world. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. As applause washed over me, I thought about the journey from humiliation to vindication, from dismissal to leadership, from victim to victor. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded me for interviews that would broadcast internationally. A documentary filmmaker requested permission to tell my story. 3 publishers wanted book deals. Harvard invited me to deliver their commencement address. Mrs. Wilson asked the CNN business correspondent, "What would you say to other family businesses facing similar corruption?" That loyalty to family doesn't require tolerance for criminal behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their choices. I smiled with satisfaction that felt as warming as summer sunshine. Actions have consequences, always. Do you have any regrets about exposing your son's crimes? My only regret is not acting sooner. Every day I hesitated was another day employees' retirement funds were being stolen. Another day, charitable donations were being diverted. Another day, corruption was being normalized. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I regret allowing love to delay justice. What's next for Wilson Enterprises? Excellence. We're expanding our scholarship program, opening operations in 3 new countries with strict ethical oversight, and launching an initiative to help other family businesses implement transparent governance practices. I adjusted my grandmother's pearls. We're proving that integrity isn't just the right choice, it's the profitable choice. Later that evening, at the after-party in my honor, I received calls from business leaders, politicians, and activists who'd been inspired by my story. The mayor wanted to discuss economic development initiatives. The governor invited me to join her Business Ethics Advisory Committee. A senator mentioned my name for a federal commerce position. Luke found me on the hotel terrace, looking out at the city lights that twinkled like diamonds scattered across black velvet. "Grandma, you're famous." "I'm vindicated, sweetheart. There's a difference. Are you happy?" I considered the question while watching traffic flow like rivers of light below us. Was I happy, or was I something more complex, satisfied, purposeful, complete? I'm at peace, Luke. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do. I smiled at this young man who'd never doubted my integrity. And yes, that makes me deeply happy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Alexander had tried to destroy my reputation, and instead made me more powerful than I'd ever been. Victoria had attempted to erase my legacy, and instead helped me build something more meaningful than anything I'd achieved before. Sometimes justice doesn't just restore what was taken. Sometimes it gives you something better than what you lost. Tonight, surrounded by recognition I'd earned through courage, I understood that my greatest victory wasn't defeating Alexander and Victoria. It was becoming the woman I was always meant to be. The new legacy I've built 6 months later proves that sometimes the best revenge is living so well that your enemies become irrelevant. I sit in my downtown loft, surrounded by art instead of corporate awards, funding dreams instead of fighting nightmares, and finally understanding what true power looks like. This morning started like every Saturday for the past 3 months. Luke arrived at 10 with coffee and croissants from that little French place near Columbia, settling into what's become his regular spot on my Italian leather sofa. At 19, he possesses more integrity than his father ever managed, and watching him grow into a man of principle has become one of my greatest joys. "Grandma, Professor Martinez wants to interview you for his new book about ethical leadership," he said, pulling academic papers from his backpack. "Also, 3 more family businesses have contacted the university, asking for guidance on transparency initiatives. How many is that this month? 15. You're becoming the go-to expert on corporate governance transformation." He grinned. "Who knew exposing your own son's crimes would become a business model?" I laughed. reviewing applications for the Wilson Foundation's latest scholarship program, 50 brilliant young women from low-income families, each receiving full university funding, plus mentorship opportunities. The money Victoria had stolen to buy designer handbags now purchases education for the next generation of female leaders. Speaking of business models, I said, signing approval letters that would change 50 lives. Eleanor wants to formalize our consulting partnership. Apparently, family businesses worldwide are requesting the Margaret Wilson treatment for their corruption problems. Are you interested? Darling, at 67, I've discovered I have a talent for corporate exorcism. Why waste it? My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Netflix approved the documentary, Margaret Wilson, the woman who wouldn't disappear. Production starts next month. The irony was delicious. Alexander had tried to make me disappear and instead made me unforgettable. Do you ever wonder what your father is up to these days, Luke? His face darkened. I did, in fact, see him last week. He holds a junior analyst position at a downtown consulting business. He glanced. Luke looked for anything to say. Diminished, as if he had shrunk. What about Victoria? 2 months ago, I got a divorce. Moved with the children to Los Angeles. She seems to be attempting to establish herself as a lifestyle influencer. Using a fictitious identity to hide her criminal history, he rolled his eyes and taught others about living authentically. I had an unexpected feeling of calm indifference rather than satisfaction. These individuals who had formerly dominated my life and inflicted such suffering and rage had now been reduced to supporting characters in a narrative that no longer focused on them. Are you missing them? Silently, Luke inquired. I miss the family I hoped we might have, the son I thought I'd nurtured, and the person I thought they were. I put my papers down and turned to face this young guy who had never let me down. However, I do not miss the true nature of who they were. My weekly visit to the Wilson Foundation's new headquarters, a renovated brownstone in Brooklyn, where young entrepreneurs get cash, workspace, and coaching to create morally sound firms, took place in the afternoon. Maria Santos, whose sustainable fashion firm recently landed its first significant retail contract, was the person I was meeting with today. As she showed me the garment prototypes created from recycled materials, Maria added, Mrs. Wilson, I want you to understand the significance of this chance. In order to provide for my children, I worked nights cleaning office buildings 3 years ago. I currently have 12 employees and am demonstrating that running a business can be both successful and responsible. Dear, that's precisely why we're here. To demonstrate that surrendering your soul is not necessary for success. I realized something important as I walked through that facility and saw young women from various walks of life creating businesses founded on honesty rather than exploitation. Destroying Alexander's illegal operation wasn't my biggest triumph. It was replacing it with something better. As night struck, I went back to my apartment and gave Eleanor a call to talk about the board meeting the next week. Wilson Enterprises, which is currently valued at over $400 million and is regarded globally as an example of stakeholder capitalism, continued to prosper under moral leadership. Eleanor responded, I have news, Margaret. Alexander requested a meeting over the phone today. What is it that he desires? Apparently to apologize, in order to atone for his actions. As I watched sunset turn the city golden, I thought of this. My kid desired reconciliation after we had been silent for months, not because he had discovered integrity or faith, but rather because he had at last come to terms with the consequences of his decisions. How do I tell him? Inform him that I'm working on a stunning project. Like any other applicant, he can apply to work at the foundation if he wants to be a part of something important. I grinned. We could think about providing him an opportunity to gain forgiveness if he shows sincere repentance and reform. And if he doesn't, He will continue to be precisely what he made the decision to be, which is unrelated to my tale. I drank a glass of wine that evening while I sat on my patio and read thank you notes from scholarship winners whose lives had been changed by money that had been taken for opulent purses. In my peripheral view, Central Park grew like a verdant oasis in the middle of the city, stunning and resilient in the face of all that attempted to erode it. 17 of Alexander's missed calls were shown on my phone. I didn't listen and erased them. Forgiveness and personal development can help rebuild certain relationships. Others come to an end when individuals disclose their true selves. Knowing the difference and having the fortitude to act appropriately are the hallmarks of wisdom. I would wake up tomorrow as Margaret Wilson, a philanthropist, corporate ethics specialist, business leader, and grandma to a remarkable young guy. Not a forgotten relative or someone's disregarded mother, but a lady who had created something significant out of treachery. Destroying your adversaries isn't always the greatest form of retaliation. It may sometimes become so strong that their behaviors and ideas are no longer significant, and their absence is no longer a loss, but a gift. I finally saw what true triumph looked like in the calm of my new existence, where there was purpose rather than suffering. It appeared to be tranquility. Peace is important,